Montana Territory, 1873. The frontier settlement of Pineridge stood defiant against the wilderness, a collection of wooden structures and determined souls carving civilization from the untamed landscape. Winter had finally released its grip on the mountains, and spring brought with it the promise of renewal, a promise that meant nothing to Eleanor Barton. At 25, Eleanor considered herself firmly on the shelf of spinsterhood. Not by society's standards, perhaps, but by her own bitter experience. Her honey-blonde hair was still lustrous, cascading down her back when not pinned up properly as befit the town's only schoolteacher. Her blue calico dress, mended in 3 places but still presentable, complemented eyes the color of a summer sky. But Eleanor had long ago decided that beauty was a liability on the frontier, not an asset. The West is no place for romance, she told herself each morning while pinning her hair precisely. Only practicality survives here. Eleanor had come to Montana 3 years prior, following her father's death and the subsequent discovery of his overwhelming debts. The teaching position had been her salvation, a respectable way to support herself far from the gossip and pity of her Philadelphia neighbors. She had built a life of rigid routine. Teaching the settlement children by day and reading her precious collection of books by night in the small room behind the schoolhouse that served as her quarters. What Eleanor truly wanted was security, a life unthreatened by the capricious nature of emotions. What she told no one was that she had once believed in love, had once accepted a proposal from a handsome banker's son who abandoned her when her father's financial ruin was revealed. The frontier offered her something essential. No one knew her past and no one expected her to marry. Here, she could be useful without being vulnerable. Yet in the quiet hours, when the lamp burned low and the wind whistled through the gaps in the schoolhouse walls, Eleanor's greatest fear surfaced, that she would die alone, unmourned except as the schoolteacher, who had educated a generation of frontier children. Sometimes this thought brought tears, but more often a grim satisfaction. Loneliness was the price of independence, after all. On this particular morning in May, Eleanor was supervising the children's recess when thundering hoofbeats drew every eye to the road. A cattle drive was passing near town, a common enough occurrence in spring, but always a source of excitement for the children. Eleanor instinctively gathered her pupils closer, wary of the rough cowboys who accompanied such drives. Miss Barton, look at the cattle," little Sarah Peterson called, pulling at her skirt. "Yes, very nice," Eleanor replied distractedly, counting heads to ensure all 12 students were accounted for. "But remember, we stay well away from the road when the drovers come through." The cattle flowed past like a dusty river, but it was the rider bringing up the rear who caught Eleanor's attention. Unlike the other dust-covered cowboys, this young man rode tall in the saddle, alert rather than trail-weary. His black Stetson sat at a rakish angle over sandy brown hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck. Clean-shaven except for the lightest shadow of stubble, he couldn't have been more than 26, with shoulders broadened by years of hard work and eyes that crinkled with easy humor even at a distance. When the young cowboy spotted the schoolchildren watching wide-eyed from the yard, he tipped his hat with a flourish that made the little girls giggle and the boys stand straighter. Eleanor found herself unconsciously tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear before catching herself with irritation. The moment might have passed unremarkably if not for young Billy Thornton, who in his excitement darted toward the road, directly into the path of a straggling steer. "Billy, no," Eleanor shouted, lunging forward. But the cowboy had already seen the danger. With reflexes honed by years on horseback, he spurred his mount between the child and the bewildered steer, sweeping the boy up with one strong arm and depositing him safely back in the schoolyard before the animal could react. "Whoa there, partner," he said, his voice a pleasant baritone with a slight Texas drawl. "Those critters don't much like surprises." Billy stared up at his rescuer with undisguised hero worship. "Gosh, mister. That was something." The cowboy swung down from his saddle with easy grace, giving the boy a gentle pat on the shoulder, just doing what needs doing. He turned to Eleanor, and she was struck by eyes the color of whiskey in sunlight. "Your student, ma'am." "Yes," Eleanor managed, her heart still pounding from the near accident. "Thank you, mister." "Owen Valentine," he replied with another tip of his hat, "trail boss for the Circle T outfit. We're moving these cattle to the railhead at Helena." "Eleanor Barton," she replied formally, extending her hand as propriety demanded. "You have my gratitude for your quick thinking." His hand enveloped hers, calloused but gentle, warm despite the cool spring air. "No gratitude necessary, Miss Barton, though I confess finding a schoolteacher of your—" He paused, his eyes taking in her appearance with obvious appreciation. "Qualifications out here is unexpected." Eleanor withdrew her hand sharply, ignoring the unfamiliar warmth creeping up her neck. "We have 15 families in Pineridge now, Mr. Valentine. Civilization follows settlement, as does education." Owen's smile deepened, revealing a dimple in his right cheek, and beauty follows too, apparently. "Mr. Valentine," she replied stiffly, "your cattle are getting ahead of you." He glanced over his shoulder at the disappearing herd, then back to her with unhurried interest. "So they are, but cattle always follow the leader, Miss Barton. I imagine I'll catch up soon enough." He mounted his horse in one fluid motion. "We'll be camping at Willow Creek for 3 days, resting the herd before the mountain passage. Perhaps you might bring your students for an educational visit. Most have probably never seen a proper cattle drive up close." Before Eleanor could formulate a refusal, the children erupted in excited praise. "Oh, please, Miss Barton. Can we go see the Cowboys, please? I want to learn about cattle driving." Owen Valentine's grin widened at the chorus. "The children have spoken, Miss Barton. Educational purposes only, of course." Eleanor found herself trapped between the children's enthusiasm and the knowing glint in the cowboy's eyes. "Perhaps. If the weather holds and parents approve." "I'll look forward to it," Owen replied, touching his hat brim once more before wheeling his horse around and galloping after his herd, leaving Eleanor with the unsettling feeling that her carefully constructed life had just been disrupted in ways she couldn't yet fathom. That evening, as Eleanor prepared lessons by lamplight, a knock at her door startled her. Few people visited the schoolteacher's quarters after hours. She opened the door cautiously to find Mrs. Peterson, the mother of her youngest student and wife of the general store owner. "I brought you some fresh bread and preserves," the older woman said, handing over a basket. "Sarah hasn't stopped talking about that cowboy who saved Billy Thornton today." "Mr. Valentine was fortunately in the right place," Eleanor replied neutrally, inviting the woman in. Mrs. Peterson settled herself comfortably at Eleanor's small table. "Sarah says you're taking the children to visit the cattle drive." "Only if parents approve," Eleanor hastened to add. "It would be educational. Many of our lessons involve agriculture and commerce." "Oh, I think it's wonderful," Mrs. Peterson said, waving away Eleanor's concern. "But I didn't come about that. I came because Sarah said this Mr. Valentine couldn't take his eyes off you." Eleanor busied herself with arranging the bread and preserves. "Children exaggerate, Mrs. Peterson. Mr. Valentine was merely being polite." "Perhaps," the older woman said with a knowing smile, "but Pineridge could use more young men like him, respectable men. Most pass through without a second glance at our little settlement." "Mr. Valentine is passing through as well," Eleanor pointed out, "and I'm hardly interested in attracting attention from transient cowboys." Mrs. Peterson studied her with motherly concern. "Eleanor, you've been with us 3 years now. You've declined every introduction and invitation. Even Reverend Miller's nephew couldn't catch your interest last Christmas." "I'm devoted to my students," Eleanor said firmly. "Romance is a distraction I neither need nor want." "You're only 25, dear. Far too young to close yourself off from life's possibilities." Eleanor sighed, setting down the jar of preserves with unnecessary force. "I'm too old for romantic notions, Mrs. Peterson. I've seen enough to know that practical arrangements serve women better than passionate ones." The older woman reached across the table to pat Eleanor's hand. "No one is too old for love, my dear. Sometimes it finds us when we least expect it or want it." After Mrs. Peterson left, Eleanor sat alone in her small room, troubled by the conversation. She had constructed her life carefully, brick by logical brick. The last thing she needed was a handsome cowboy with laughing eyes dismantling her defenses with nothing more than a smile and a heroic gesture. "He'll be gone within the week," she assured herself, "and life will return to normal." But as she blew out her lamp and settled into bed, Eleanor couldn't quite banish the memory of Owen Valentine's warm hand holding hers, or the surprising flutter in her chest when he'd looked at her as though she were worth seeing. The next morning brought an unexpected development. As Eleanor arrived at the schoolhouse, she found Owen Valentine himself leaning against the hitching post, hat in hand. He straightened when he saw her approaching, and Eleanor was struck again by his easy physicality. In the clear morning light, she could better appreciate his features, the strong jaw, the straight nose, the way sunlight brought out golden highlights in his brown hair. "Miss Barton," he greeted her, his smile warm. "I hope I'm not intruding." Eleanor clutched her books tighter. "School doesn't begin for another half hour, Mr. Valentine." "And shouldn't you be with your cattle?" "My men have things well in hand," he replied. "I rode back to town on business." He hesitated, an unexpected shyness crossing his features. "And to bring you this." From behind his back he produced a small leather-bound book. Eleanor took it cautiously, her breath catching when she read the title, Tennyson's Poems. "How did you know?" she asked, unable to hide her surprise. Owen's smile deepened. "I noticed your collection through the window yesterday, mostly practical texts but well worn. The general store owner mentioned you ask after poetry whenever new shipments arrive." Eleanor traced the embossed cover with reverent fingers. "This must have cost." "Nothing that would concern you," he interrupted gently. "Consider it thanks for agreeing to bring the children to the camp." "I haven't definitively agreed," she reminded him, even as she cradled the book. "Haven't you?" He cocked his head, studying her with those perceptive eyes. "The children seemed certain yesterday." Eleanor sighed, knowing she had indeed been swayed by their enthusiasm. "We'll come tomorrow afternoon if the weather holds. For 1 hour only, Mr. Valentine. This is an educational excursion." "Of course," he agreed, his eyes twinkling. "I'll ensure the men are on their best behavior. No cursing, no chewing tobacco near the young ones, no tall tales about outlaws." "That would be appreciated." She hesitated, then added more softly, "and thank you for the book. It's been years since I've read Tennyson." "'Tis better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all," Owen quoted, his expression growing more serious. Eleanor's smile faded. "I prefer his less romantic works." "Do you now?" Owen studied her face with disconcerting insight. Strange choice for a young woman. "I'm hardly young, Mr. Valentine." He laughed then, the sound rich and genuine. "Miss Barton, if you're not young at 25, then I must be ancient at 26. "Age isn't merely a number," she replied stiffly. "Experience ages us differently." His expression sobered. "That it does," he agreed, surprising her. "I've known 20-year-olds with souls older than the mountains and 50-year-olds with hearts young as springtime." Before Eleanor could respond, children's voices approached, ending their private conversation. Owen replaced his hat with a nod. "Until tomorrow, Miss Barton. I look forward to your educational visit." As he mounted his horse, Eleanor called after him impulsively, "Mr. Valentine. How did you know my age?" He turned in the saddle, that disarming smile returning. "A gentleman has his sources, Miss Barton." With a tip of his hat, he was gone, leaving Eleanor bewildered at her own curiosity about him. Throughout that day's lessons, Eleanor found herself distracted. She caught herself staring out the window toward the direction of Willow Creek, where the cattle drive was camped. Twice she had to ask students to repeat questions, earning curious looks from the older children. That night, despite her better judgment, she opened the Tennyson volume. A pressed wildflower, a delicate mountain bluebell, marked a page in Locksley Hall. Eleanor read the marked passage. "Many a morning on the moorland did we hear the copses ring, and her whisper thronged my pulses with the fullness of the spring." Her fingers trembled slightly as she closed the book. Owen Valentine was far more dangerous than she had initially assessed, not because he was rough or uncouth, but because he understood poetry and saw something in her that she had spent years burying. The afternoon of their visit to the cattle camp dawned clear and mild. Eleanor had dressed with particular care, choosing her best blue dress despite knowing it was impractical for a dusty cattle camp. She had pinned her hair more elaborately than usual, then chided herself for vanity and redone it in her customary simple style. The children were beside themselves with excitement, particularly the boys, who had spent the morning drawing pictures of cowboys and cattle instead of focusing on their arithmetic. As they walked the mile to Willow Creek, Eleanor repeatedly reminded the children of proper behavior. "Remember, this is an educational opportunity. You are to observe quietly, ask appropriate questions, and thank Mr. Valentine for allowing our visit. The cattle camp came into view, a sprawling arrangement of grazing cattle, supply wagons, and campfires around which cowboys rested. Owen Valentine stood waiting at the edge of the camp, and Eleanor couldn't help noticing that he too had spruced up his appearance. His shirt was clean, his bandana neatly knotted, his boots polished to a rich luster. "Welcome to Circle T on the trail," he called cheerfully as they approached. "We've prepared quite the educational experience for you all." What followed was indeed educational, but also clearly planned with enjoyment in mind. The cowboys demonstrated rope tricks, explained cattle brands, and showed the children how they cooked meals on the trail. One elderly drover told stories of the great cattle kingdoms of Texas, while another explained how they navigated using stars. The children were entranced, asking countless questions that the men answered with surprising patience. Eleanor found herself standing slightly apart, watching Owen Valentine in his element. He moved among his men with easy authority, clearly respected despite his youth. Several times she caught him looking her way, his expression warming when their eyes met. "He's good with them," a voice said beside her. Eleanor turned to find an older cowboy, gray-haired and weathered, observing the scene. "The children seem to adore him," she agreed. "Children, men, horses, cattle, Owen has a way with all of them," the man said. "I've ridden with him 3 seasons now. Best trail boss I've seen, and I've been driving cattle since before the war." "You've known him long, then?" The old cowboy nodded. "Since he was a scraggly kid of 16, determined to prove himself. His daddy was killed in the war, left him the oldest of 5. He's been working cattle drives ever since, sending money home to his mama and siblings." Eleanor glanced at Owen with new interest. "He seems young to be a trail boss." "Earned it by being smarter, working harder, and caring more," the cowboy said simply. "The men would follow him through hell if he asked. Most trail bosses rule by fear or habit. Owen leads by example." Their conversation was interrupted when Owen approached, carrying a guitar. "Time for some music, I think," he announced, settling on a log near the main campfire. "Miss Barton, would you and the children like to join us?" The children needed no second invitation, rushing to sit cross-legged around the fire. Eleanor followed more sedately, taking a seat on a nearby stump. Owen strummed a few chords, then began a ballad about cattle trails and starlit skies, his voice clear and surprisingly melodic. The children swayed in time, some of the older ones joining the chorus after hearing it once. When the song ended, little Sarah Peterson spoke up. "Mr. Valentine, do cowboys ever get married?" Owen laughed, his eyes finding Eleanor's across the fire. "Some do, Miss Sarah. Though it takes a special kind of woman to marry a man who follows the herds." "Miss Barton isn't married," Sarah continued innocently. "My mama says she's waiting for the right gentleman to appreciate her properly." Eleanor felt heat rush to her face as several cowboys chuckled. "Sarah," she said sharply, "that's hardly appropriate conversation." Owen's expression remained gentle. "Your mama sounds like a wise woman, Sarah. Any man would be fortunate to earn Miss Barton's consideration." His eyes held Eleanor's for a moment longer than necessary before he looked away. "Now, who wants to hear about the time I had to round up 100 cattle during a thunderstorm?" The remainder of the visit passed without further embarrassment, but Eleanor felt oddly unsettled. As they prepared to leave, Owen approached her while the children were saying goodbye to the friendly camp cook who had given them each a cookie. "I hope the visit was educational enough, Miss Barton," he said, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "The children have learned a great deal," she acknowledged. "You've been very generous with your time. Perhaps you might return tomorrow, without the children." When she looked startled, he added quickly, "The foreman's wife is traveling with us. She'd provide proper chaperoning. I thought you might enjoy seeing more of the operation, the business side that might be too dull for the children." Eleanor hesitated. The proper response would be polite refusal. Yet something in his earnest expression made her consider otherwise. "I'm not certain that would be appropriate, Mr. Valentine." "Owen," he corrected gently, "and what's inappropriate about a schoolteacher expanding her knowledge of Western industry?" "Purely educational, of course." "Of course," she echoed, unable to suppress a small smile at his transparent excuse. 3 o'clock, he pressed, sensing her wavering. Against her better judgment, Eleanor nodded. 3 o'clock. "Purely educational." His answering smile was worth the risk of gossip, she decided. As she gathered the children for the walk back to town, Eleanor found herself looking forward to tomorrow with an anticipation she hadn't felt in years. The next afternoon found Eleanor approaching the cattle camp alone, second-guessing her decision with every step. She had told Mrs. Peterson where she was going, a precaution for propriety's sake, but had been flustered by the older woman's knowing smile and assurance that she would explain to anyone who asked that the schoolteacher was researching agricultural methods for future lessons. Owen was waiting for her at the camp's edge, as he had been for the children. But this time he had saddled 2 horses. "I thought we might ride to the ridge," he explained, noting her questioning look. "The view gives perspective on how a cattle drive is organized, Mrs. Thornton is expecting us for coffee afterward." He gestured toward a wagon where a middle-aged woman waved cheerfully. "I haven't ridden in years," Eleanor admitted. Owen's smile was reassuring. "Daisy here is gentle as a lamb. I chose her specially." The ride proved less daunting than Eleanor had feared. Owen was attentive without being overbearing, and the gentle mare responded easily to Eleanor's tentative commands. As they climbed the ridge overlooking the valley, Eleanor found herself relaxing into the rhythm of horseback riding, remembering skills from her childhood in Pennsylvania. At the summit, they dismounted. The view was spectacular, rolling hills giving way to distant mountains, with the cattle drive spread below like a living map. Owen pointed out features of the operation. How the herd was arranged, where the chuck wagon positioned itself each night, how the men rotated shifts. "It's like orchestrating a small army," Eleanor observed, genuinely impressed. "That's exactly it," Owen agreed. "Every man has his role, every animal its place. One misstep can cascade into disaster. Yet you seem to manage it effortlessly." Owen laughed, the sound carrying on the clear air. "Hardly effortless. I've made every mistake possible getting here. Lost cattle to rivers, to rustlers, to my own poor judgment, but I learned." At a young age, Eleanor noted, recalling what the older cowboy had told her. Something flickered in Owen's eyes, surprise, followed by understanding. "Been asking about me, Miss Barton." "Your men respect you," she replied, avoiding a direct answer. "I was curious how someone your age earned such regard." "Necessity," he said simply. "When my father died at Gettysburg, I became the man of the family at 14. 5 younger siblings, a mother in failing health, and a mortgaged farm in drought-stricken Texas." He gestured toward the cattle below. "This life wasn't a choice. It was the only way to keep food on our table." "Yet you seem to love it," Eleanor observed. Owen nodded, his expression softening as he looked out over the landscape. "I found my purpose in it. There's freedom in this life, Eleanor. The sky above, good horses beneath, honest work that shows its worth." He turned to face her directly. "But I won't pretend it isn't lonely sometimes." The sudden intimacy of his gaze made Eleanor look away. "We should return. Mrs. Thornton will be waiting." Owen didn't press, but as he helped her remount, his hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary. The gesture left Eleanor flustered, aware of him in ways she had forbidden herself for years. Mrs. Thornton proved to be a jolly, motherly woman who served coffee and fresh-baked biscuits in the shade of her wagon. Her husband, the trail foreman, joined them briefly before returning to his duties. "Owen tells me you're from Philadelphia originally," Mrs. Thornton said conversationally. "How did you end up teaching in Montana Territory?" Eleanor gave her practiced response. "The frontier needs educated women. I saw an opportunity to make a difference." "And no young man back east captured your heart before you left?" the older woman probed. Owen interjected before Eleanor could answer. "Mrs. Thornton believes everyone should be as happily matched as she and the foreman." 30 years this June," the woman confirmed proudly. "Met him when I was 17 and he was 22. Never regretted a day, even when we lost everything in the war and had to start over out west." "You're fortunate," Eleanor said politely. "Not everyone finds such lasting happiness." "True enough," Mrs. Thornton agreed. "But it's also true that some people guard their hearts so carefully they never give happiness a chance to find them." Her kind eyes studied Eleanor's face. "Begging your pardon for speaking plainly, Miss Barton, but a young woman like yourself shouldn't be so set against possibilities." "I'm not against possibilities," Eleanor protested. "I'm simply practical." Owen's quiet laugh drew her attention. Practical is building a life you want to live, Eleanor, not just one you can endure. His words struck uncomfortably close to truths Eleanor preferred not to examine. The remainder of the visit passed in lighter conversation, but Owen's observation lingered in her thoughts. As the afternoon waned, Owen insisted on escorting Eleanor back to town. They rode side by side in companionable silence until they reached the outskirts of Pineridge. "We break camp tomorrow," Owen said as they dismounted near the schoolhouse, moving the herd toward Helena. "I wish you safe travels," Eleanor replied formally, fighting an unexpected pang of disappointment. Owen stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. "I'll be returning this way in about 6 weeks after delivering the herd. Circle T has a contract to move another herd north before winter." "I see," Eleanor said, not trusting herself to say more. "Would it be presumptuous to call on you when I return?" he asked, his usual confidence tempered with genuine uncertainty. Eleanor hesitated. The sensible answer was clear: discourage him now, avoid complications, maintain the life she had constructed. Yet the words wouldn't come. "I'm not what you think, Owen," she said instead. "I'm not some romantic frontier flower waiting to be plucked. I came west to escape, not to find love." "Escape what?" he asked gently. Eleanor looked away. "Disappointment, humiliation. I was engaged once to a banker's son who claimed to love me. When my father died and his debts were revealed, my fiancé discovered he loved financial security more than he loved me." Owen's expression darkened. "He was a fool." "He was practical," Eleanor corrected, "as am I now." "Is that what you think I am?" Owen asked. "Another man looking for advantage. Eleanor, I drive cattle for a living. I sleep under the stars more nights than under a roof. What possible advantage could I seek from you?" "Then what do you want?" she challenged. "To know you," he answered simply. "To see if the woman who reads Tennyson by lamplight might find something worthwhile in a cowboy who dreams of more than endless trails." Eleanor felt her carefully constructed defenses wavering. "I'm too old to believe in romantic notions, Owen." He laughed then, the sound warm in the gathering dusk. "You're 25, Eleanor, not 85, and age is just a number in my heart." His hand came up to gently touch her cheek. "Life has taught us both hard lessons. That doesn't mean we stop living." Before she could respond, he stepped back, respecting her space. 6 weeks, he said. "Think about it. If you decide I'm not worth the risk, I'll tip my hat and ride on. No hard feelings." "And if I haven't decided?" Eleanor asked, surprising herself. Owen's smile returned, warming her despite the evening chill. "Then I'll do my best to help you decide, preferably in my favor." With that, he mounted his horse and rode back toward the cattle camp, leaving Eleanor with turbulent thoughts and the unsettling awareness that in just 3 days, Owen Valentine had somehow breached walls she had spent years building. The next 6 weeks passed with excruciating slowness. Eleanor threw herself into teaching, expanded the school library, and organized a community recitation night, anything to keep her mind occupied. Yet Owen Valentine intruded into her thoughts at the most inconvenient moments. She would find herself pausing while reading to her class, remembering his voice quoting Tennyson. Or she would catch herself looking down the road toward Helena, wondering where the cattle drive was now. The Tennyson volume remained on her bedside table, the pressed bluebell still marking Locksley Hall. Sometimes, in the privacy of her room, Eleanor would read the marked passage aloud, hearing the words in Owen's voice rather than her own. 4 weeks after Owen's departure, a letter arrived from Helena. Eleanor's hands trembled slightly as she broke the plain seal. "Miss Barton. The herd reached Helena safely. We return in 2 weeks, weather permitting. I find myself counting days. I remain respectfully yours. O.V." The brevity of the note both frustrated and thrilled her. Eleanor tucked it into her Tennyson volume, then immediately removed it, chiding herself for sentimentality. She was still no closer to a decision about Owen Valentine. Logic told her that encouraging him would be foolish. He was a cowboy, constantly moving with the herds. She was rooted in Pineridge, with responsibilities to her students and the community that had welcomed her. Yet something had awakened in her during their brief acquaintance, a yearning for connection she had denied for years, a reminder that practical survival wasn't the same as truly living. "You're being ridiculous," she told her reflection as she prepared for bed. "A few conversations, a shared appreciation for poetry, and you're contemplating upending your entire life." But was she contemplating that? What exactly was Owen Valentine offering? Not marriage, he had made no such declaration. Perhaps merely a dalliance, a frontier flirtation to pass the time between cattle drives. The thought should have strengthened her resolve to refuse him, yet it only highlighted how little she actually knew of his intentions. As the 6th week approached, Eleanor found herself uncharacteristically fussing over her appearance. She trimmed her honey-blonde hair, freshened the ribbons on her best bonnet, and spent an evening mending the small tear in her green Sunday dress, the one that brought out the blue in her eyes, according to Mrs. Peterson. The day Owen was due to return, Eleanor was distracted throughout her lessons. Twice she called students by the wrong names, and once she completely lost her place during a geography lecture. When school dismissed, she lingered, straightening already tidy rows of primers and alphabetically arranging books that were already in perfect order. A knock at the schoolhouse door made her heart leap. Eleanor smoothed her skirts, patted her hair, and opened the door with what she hoped was calm dignity. But instead of Owen Valentine, she found Reverend Miller on her doorstep, his expression grave. "Miss Barton," he said solemnly, "I'm afraid I bring troubling news." Eleanor's hand flew to her throat. "What is it?" "There was an incident with the returning cattle drive," the Reverend explained. "Rustlers attacked them in Bitterroot Pass. Several men were injured." Owen, the name escaped before she could stop herself. Reverend Miller's expression softened with understanding. "Mr. Valentine was among the wounded. They've brought him to Doc Simmons's place." Eleanor barely remembered crossing town to the doctor's small infirmary. Inside, she found Mrs. Peterson already there, helping the doctor's wife prepare bandages. "How is he?" Eleanor asked, not bothering to pretend her interest was casual. "Shot in the shoulder," Mrs. Peterson replied. "Doc's removed the bullet, but there's concern about infection. He lost considerable blood before they got him here." "May I see him?" Mrs. Peterson exchanged a look with the doctor's wife. "He's been asking for you, but he's weak. Doc says visitors should be brief." Eleanor followed Mrs. Peterson to a small back room where Owen lay on a narrow bed, his face pale against the white pillowcase. His left shoulder was heavily bandaged, and a sheen of sweat covered his forehead. When he heard them enter, his eyes fluttered open, focusing slowly on Eleanor. "You came," he murmured, a ghost of his usual smile touching his lips. "Of course I came," she replied, moving to his bedside. "What happened?" "Rustlers," Owen answered weakly. "They came at dawn, got away with 30 head before we drove them off." He winced as he tried to shift position. "Careless of me to catch a bullet." "Had plans for today?" "Plans that can wait until you're recovered," Eleanor said firmly, taking his hand. It felt hot, too hot, against her fingers. "Might not be much recovery," Owen said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Doc's not optimistic about the fever." Eleanor's chest tightened painfully. "Don't talk nonsense, you're young and strong." His fingers tightened around hers. "If I don't make it, Eleanor, I want you to know, these past weeks, thinking about you, best time of my life." "Stop it," she commanded, tears threatening. "You're not going to die, Owen Valentine." "I forbid it." A weak chuckle escaped him. "Yes, ma'am, always did admire a woman who knows her mind." Mrs. Peterson touched Eleanor's shoulder. "The doctor says he needs rest now." Eleanor nodded, but before releasing Owen's hand, she leaned close to his ear. "I've been counting days too," she whispered, then pressed a swift kiss to his fevered brow. The next 3 days were the longest of Eleanor's life. She taught her classes mechanically, then hurried to the doctor's home each afternoon to help tend Owen. The fever raged, sometimes sending him into delirium, where he called out commands to phantom cowboys or murmured endearments in Eleanor's direction, unaware she was actually present. On the 3rd night, when Doc Simmons looked particularly grave, Eleanor refused to leave Owen's bedside. She sat through the dark hours, bathing his face with cool water, talking softly to him about inconsequential matters, her students' progress, the changing leaves on the cottonwoods by the creek, poems she had memorized. "You must recover," she told him during the darkest hour before dawn, when his breathing had become shallow and labored. "I haven't given you my answer yet, and I refuse to have you haunt me with uncertainty." As if her voice had reached through his fever, Owen's eyes opened, clearer than they had been in days. "Eleanor," he whispered. "I'm here," she replied, taking his hand. "Important question," he managed. "Need to ask while I can." Eleanor leaned closer. "Ask then." When I'm well, he said, each word an effort, will you marry me? Eleanor sat frozen, the unexpected proposal striking her speechless. Owen, you're delirious. No, he interrupted with surprising strength, thinking clearly for first time in days. Love you, Eleanor. Knew it watching you with those children, want to build a life with you. We hardly know each other, she protested weakly. Know what matters, he insisted, your courage, your kindness. The way you pretend not to smile at jokes but do anyway, how you touch that locket at your throat when you're nervous. Eleanor's hand went unconsciously to the locket, her mother's, that she wore always. You notice too much. Notice everything about you, he agreed. Want a lifetime to notice more. Your work the cattle drives. Was saving, he interrupted again. Have enough now, partner in the Circle T ranch outside Helena. Real home, not just trails. His fingers tightened on hers. Need an answer, Eleanor. Gives me something to fight for. Eleanor looked at this man who had breached every defense she had built. His fever-bright eyes held no calculation, no hidden agenda, only hope and an affection so plain it made her chest ache. Yes, she whispered, the word escaping before she could reconsider. Yes, I'll marry you. But only if you promise to recover. A smile transformed Owen's drawn features. Deal, he murmured, before his eyes drifted closed again, but his breathing seemed easier, his grip on her hand firmer. Eleanor sat back in her chair, stunned by her own answer. She had just agreed to marry a man she had known for less than 2 weeks of actual interaction. It was madness, the very kind of impractical decision she had sworn never to make again. Yet as dawn broke over the mountains, bringing light to the small room, Eleanor felt not regret but a spreading sense of rightness. Perhaps true practicality wasn't avoiding risk but recognizing when something worth risking everything for appeared in one's life. The fever broke that morning. By afternoon, Doc Simmons was cautiously optimistic. By evening, Owen was sitting up, weak but alert, taking broth from Eleanor's hands. Did I dream it, he asked when they were briefly alone, or did you agree to marry me? You didn't dream it, Eleanor confirmed, her cheeks warming, though I reserve the right to reconsider if you're proposing only because you were delirious. Owen's laugh was stronger than it had any right to be after his ordeal. Eleanor Barton, I've been planning to ask you since the moment I saw you gathering those children away from my cattle. The delirium just made me brave enough to do it sooner rather than later. It's still madness, she said, setting aside the empty soup bowl. We barely know each other. Then say you'll court properly once I'm recovered, Owen suggested. Let me prove my intentions are honorable and my affections genuine. Eleanor smiled despite herself. That would be the sensible approach. And if after proper courtship you still believe I'm worth the risk, then we'll marry. He captured her hand, bringing it to his lips. I'm a patient man, Eleanor. I can wait until you're certain. Eleanor looked at their joined hands, his tanned and calloused from years of rope work, hers paler and marked with ink stains from teaching. Different lives, different paths, yet somehow fitting together with surprising ease. I think, she said slowly, that I'm already more certain than is entirely reasonable. Owen's recovery progressed steadily over the next 2 weeks. As his strength returned, so did his determination to court Eleanor properly. Once Doc Simmons declared him fit for short excursions, Owen began appearing at the schoolhouse after lessons, often with small gifts, wildflowers, a carved wooden bird, once a length of blue ribbon that matched her eyes exactly. They took gentle walks through Pineridge, his arm offered for support though they both knew it was merely an excuse for closeness. They dined with the Petersons, attended church services together, and spent evenings on the schoolhouse porch, talking until the stars emerged. Eleanor learned that Owen had educated himself through borrowed books during long cattle drives, that he could name constellations and calculate distances using only the stars, that he wrote letters to his youngest sister every week without fail. Owen discovered Eleanor's passion for teaching, her secret ambition to establish a proper library for Pineridge, her ability to mimic bird calls with astonishing accuracy, a childhood skill she had never mentioned to anyone in Montana. When did you know, Eleanor asked one evening as they watched the sunset paint the mountains gold, that you wanted to marry me, I mean? Owen considered the question seriously. I was attracted from the first moment, he admitted. But I knew with certainty the day you brought the children to the cattle camp. You were standing apart, watching everything with those observant eyes, and I thought, there's a woman who sees the world clearly. I want her clear sight in my life. Even though I was determined to be practical and unromantic, Eleanor teased. Especially then, Owen replied, his smile warming his eyes. The ones most determined to avoid love are often those who need it most. He took her hand, his touch now familiar and cherished. What about you? When did you decide I might be worth the risk? Eleanor thought back over their brief but intense acquaintance. I'm not certain there was a single moment, she said honestly. It was cumulative, the poetry, your kindness to the children, the stories your men told about you, but perhaps. When you were fevered and still noticed how I touch my locket when nervous, no one has ever paid such careful attention to me before. I plan to spend a lifetime paying attention, Eleanor Barton, Owen said softly. If you'll let me. 3 months later, on a crisp autumn day, Eleanor stood in the back room of Pineridge's small church, allowing Mrs. Peterson to make final adjustments to her wedding dress. The simple cream gown with lace at the collar and cuffs had been ordered from Helena, arriving just a week before the ceremony. You make a beautiful bride, Mrs. Peterson said, stepping back to admire the effect. Owen won't know what hit him. Eleanor smiled, touching her mother's locket that now held a tiny photograph of Owen on one side. I still can't quite believe this is happening. Having second thoughts, the older woman asked perceptively. Not about Owen, Eleanor assured her. Never about him, just about such a complete change in my life. I've been independent for so long. Marriage doesn't end independence, Mrs. Peterson said wisely. It transforms it into something shared. The right partner doesn't diminish you, they expand what's possible. A knock at the door preceded Reverend Miller's voice. It's time, Miss Barton. Are you ready? Eleanor took a deep breath, meeting her reflection's eyes in the small mirror. The woman who looked back at her was changed from the one who had greeted Owen Valentine 6 months ago, still practical, still thoughtful, but no longer afraid to hope. I'm ready, she called. The small church was filled to capacity. Every family in Pineridge had come to see their schoolteacher marry the handsome cowboy who had purchased land just outside town. Even more surprising were the 20-odd cowboys from the Circle T outfit who had ridden for days to attend, now sitting uncomfortably in their Sunday best, hats clutched in nervous hands. But Eleanor saw none of them as she entered. Her eyes found Owen immediately, standing tall beside the altar, his shoulder fully healed, his face shining with undisguised joy as he watched her approach. He wore a new black suit, his sandy hair neatly trimmed, his boots polished to a mirror shine. Yet it was the love in his eyes that transformed him from handsome to breathtaking. As Eleanor reached his side and placed her hand in his, Owen leaned close to whisper, "Still think you're too old for love, Eleanor Barton." She smiled up at him, heart full. "Age is just a number in my heart, Owen Valentine." The words they spoke before Reverend Miller and the assembled community were traditional, but the promises they made to each other went deeper, promises of partnership, respect, and a love built on friendship as solid as the mountains surrounding them. When Owen kissed her as husband and wife for the first time, Eleanor finally understood what Mrs. Peterson had meant about expansion rather than diminishment. In Owen's arms, she felt not the loss of her carefully constructed independence, but the gaining of a shared strength greater than what either possessed alone. The schoolhouse continued to be Eleanor's domain, now expanded with books Owen ordered from as far away as San Francisco. The small homestead they established outside town became a gathering place for community celebrations and a way station for weary travelers. Owen's expertise with cattle helped neighboring ranchers improve their herds, while Eleanor's education program grew to include evening classes for adults eager to learn reading and mathematics. 1 year after their wedding, as they sat on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the same mountains that had witnessed their first sunset together, Owen placed his hand gently over Eleanor's rounded belly. "Any regrets?" he asked, the question a comfortable ritual between them. Eleanor covered his hand with hers, feeling their child move beneath their joined fingers. "Only that I wasted so much time believing I was too old, too practical, too wounded for love." Owen's kiss was as tender as his first had been. "We found each other exactly when we were meant to, Eleanor Valentine, not a moment too soon or too late." As stars emerged in the vast Montana sky, Eleanor leaned against her husband's shoulder, thinking of the journey from the cautious schoolteacher who had hidden behind practicality to the woman who had found that true practicality meant embracing love when it appeared, unexpected and undeniable, in the form of a young cowboy with poetry in his pocket and patience in his heart.